Hi everybody, Dana Sparks, broker of Maximum One Greater Atlanta Realtors, and today's contract tip is again short and sweet, and just want to explain a little bit about the due diligence period or the buyer's right to terminate period. We are seeing an unfortunate trend in contracts. I don't know if it is to help make a buyer's offer appear more competitive or not, but what we are seeing in a lot of contracts right now are buyer's agents writing contracts and going binding, having a buyer and a seller go binding with 0 days due diligence, zero due diligence. And if you are a listing agent, that's wonderful. If you are a buyer's agent, that is not necessarily the best situation for your buyer. So I'm not quite sure why some buyers are choosing to do this other than to try and make their offer or contract appear more competitive in a multiple offer situation. But I just want to remind you that the due diligence period has nothing to do with inspections. Well, not nothing to do with inspections, but it's not an inspection period. So if a buyer is going to purchase a home and not have an inspection, or let me take that back, not request of the seller to address any repairs, that's fine. But the due diligence period is so much more than that. The due diligence period, really, even if a buyer goes binding with the due diligence period, they don't have to have it inspected. They don't have to request any repairs of the seller. Even if they do, the seller is not obligated to make any of those requests. The due diligence period is a time frame within which a buyer may terminate under no penalty. So a buyer may have an inspection done or not. But if a buyer's agent if a buyer chooses to go binding on a contract with 0 days due diligence, they can't terminate. They are locked in. Now, there may be a couple of other contingencies, for example, a financing contingency or an appraisal contingency or a sale or lease of their current home contingency, but meeting the terms of those other agreed upon contingencies would be the only way a buyer could terminate that contract. They cannot just change their mind or choose to have it inspected, and even if they're not going to request the seller to make any repairs, if those repairs are something above and beyond what the buyer's willing to do, there's no way for a buyer to terminate without defaulting on the contract. So let me read to you again what a buyer's due diligence period is for. So it is clearly defined in the GAR Purchase and Sale Agreement. It's Form F201 under paragraph B8 under inspection and due diligence, and it does talk about the buyer's right to inspect the property regardless. But what it says is the property is sold as is unless this agreement is subject to due diligence. And again, it says that unless the property is being sold subject to due diligence, the property is sold as is with all of its faults. Now you listing agents, even if it is being sold as is, the seller still must disclose under Georgia law any latent or hidden defects of the property that the seller is aware of. And by virtue of you having a Georgia real estate license, you too must disclose that regardless of what the seller instructs you to do or not do. But further on, it states that the purpose of the due diligence period, during the due diligence period, the buyer shall determine whether or not to exercise the buyer's option to proceed or not proceed with the purchase of the property. Period. That's all the due diligence period is. If the buyer has concerns with the property, the buyer may seek to negotiate an amendment with the seller to address those concerns. Then it goes on and says, notice of the decision not to proceed. The buyer shall have elected to exercise the buyer's option to go ahead and go through with it, purchase the property, unless prior to the end of any due diligence period, the buyer does notify the seller of their decision to not proceed by delivering to the seller a notice that they are terminating the contract. In the RE forms, this information is all clearly spelled out in the standard terms, which is RE1, under paragraph 6.1, where it talks about the buyer's general right to terminate. And again, it is the same contractual concept as the due diligence period in the GAR forms. And it does go on to say that that buyer's right to terminate period is an option for the buyer to terminate. They can have an inspection done or do not have to have an inspection done. But my point to you guys is, when you are representing a buyer, zero due diligence doesn't have anything to do with the seller. I mean, it does. You guys, I'm trying to make the point that you need to protect your buyer by putting in at least a couple of days due diligence, so that the buyer, even if the seller has said, I'm not doing any repairs, I'm selling it as is, so forth and so on, that's not a reason to put 0 days due diligence for a buyer. The buyer may still go have the property checked out to see what it is they're buying. And once they have it checked out, if the property does contain something that the buyer is not willing to take on, if there's 0 days due diligence, your buyer has no contractual way to terminate without penalty, without defaulting under the contract. And that penalty would be, the default would be the seller has rights under a default, and the listing agent, the listing broker, has rights to pursue the buyer for defaulting under the contract. So take a look at that, rethink your strategy about going in for 0 days due diligence. Again, even with a due diligence period to protect a buyer does not mean that the seller is obligated to perform any repairs. Hope this contract tip helped you out. Dana Sparks, broker of Maximum One Greater Atlanta Realtors, satisfying your needs with service, innovation, and education.